This explains why some homes feel expensive the moment you walk in, while others feel cluttered and flat. It rarely comes down to budget, because the difference usually hides in invisible rules. You see, specific measurements for hanging art, alongside precise formulas for layering light, and the exact ratio of color that tricks the eye into seeing harmony. Professional designers don't guess, since they use a mathematical framework to build comfort. By the end of this video, you will have that same framework to replicate the high-end look without buying new furniture. Your home tells its story in the first 10 seconds. Designers call this the landing strip effect and obsess over it because it dictates how the rest of the house feels. A common mistake involves treating the entryway as a storage locker for shoes and keys, but a designer treats it as a prologue. The solution is a single dedicated surface, like a console table or floating shelf that serves no utilitarian purpose other than to pause the eye. Style it with a mirror to bounce light and expand the perceived space before adding a tray to corral the clutter. When you clear the floor space and direct focus upward, the psychological weight of the room lifts instantly. Bad lighting ruins good design faster than anything else. If you rely on a single overhead grid of recessed cans, your rooms will feel like a waiting room or a hospital. High-end spaces use a strategy called layering, which mixes ambient, task, and accent lighting to create depth. The technical spec that matters most is color temperature, measured in kelvins. For living spaces and bedrooms, you need to stay strictly between 2700 and 3000 Kelvin. Go higher, and the room turns cold and sterile, while going lower makes it look muddy. In 2026, the trend has shifted heavily toward dim to warm technology, but the core rule remains that you should never let the ceiling be your only source of light. Lamps at eye level soften the shadows that overhead lights create. Designers rarely trust their gut when it comes to color balance because they trust math instead. The 60-30-10 rule prevents a room from looking chaotic or boring. 60% of the room is your dominant color, which usually includes the walls, large rugs, and sofa. 30% belongs to your secondary color, like curtains, side chairs, or painted millwork, to support the main theme while offering contrast. The final 10% is the accent, where you take risks with throw pillows, art, or a bold vase. Most amateurs split colors evenly, which leaves the eye confused about where to look. By forcing an imbalance, you actually create focus. The room feels intentional because the hierarchy of color guides you through it naturally. You can buy the most expensive sofa in the world, but if it doesn't fit the scale of the room, it will look cheap. Scale refers to the size of an item relative to the space, while proportion refers to how items relate to each other. A massive sectional in a small room eats the floor plan and makes the walls feel like they are closing in. Apartment-sized furniture in a room with 12-foot ceilings looks like a dollhouse. The golden rule for coffee tables illustrates this perfectly, since your table should be 2/3 the length of your sofa. Anything smaller feels dinky, while anything larger blocks flow. When items relate to each other mathematically, the brain registers the space as correct, without knowing why. If you want to trick people into thinking your ceilings are taller and your windows are larger, You should change how you hang your curtains. Most people mount the rod directly on the window frame, which boxes the window in and highlights its limits. You need to go high and wide instead. Mount the rod 4 to 6 inches below the ceiling crown, or at least half a foot above the window frame. Then, extend the rod 8 to 12 inches past the frame on each side. When the curtains are open, they should stack against the wall rather than the glass. This exposes the entire window pane to flood the room with light and make the architecture feel grander. It is a simple optical illusion that adds thousands of dollars of perceived value. A postage stamp rug floating in the middle of a room is the single most common design error. It visually shrinks the floor plan and makes furniture feel like it is drifting away. The rule to follow is front legs on. In a living area, your rug needs to be large enough that the front legs of every major seating piece sit firmly on top of it. This physically connects the sofa and chairs to create a designated conversation zone. For an average room, an 8 by 10 is often the minimum, yet people constantly buy smaller sizes because they are cheaper. Avoid making that trade-off. A larger, less expensive jute rug looks infinitely better than a small, expensive wool one that barely fits under the coffee table. Galleries don't hang art randomly, and neither should you. The center of your artwork should sit exactly 57 inches from the floor. This aligns with the average human eye level and creates a calming horizon line throughout the home. If you are hanging a gallery wall, the center of the entire grouping should hit that 57-inch mark. When hanging art above furniture, like a sofa or headboard, you should forget the floor and focus on the gap, so the bottom of the frame hovers 6 to 8 inches above the furniture back. If you go any higher, the art feels disconnected, like it is floating away, while anything lower feels cramped. These specific measurements act as a fail-safe against awkward placement. Our brains are wired to find odd numbers more engaging than even ones, because even numbers create symmetry, which is easy but often boring. Odd numbers create a visual journey known as the rule of three. When styling a coffee table or shelf, you should group items in threes, such as a vertical vase, a horizontal stack of books, and a sculptural object to bridge them. This triangular composition forces the eye to move around the display rather than just glancing and moving on. The rule applies to furniture layouts too, since 2 chairs and a sofa create a dynamic triangle, whereas 2 sofas facing each other can sometimes feel like a rigid standoff. If a surface feels flat or staged, you should check your numbers and add a. For years, the advice was to match everything. So chrome faucets meant chrome handles and chrome light fixtures. In 2026, that look screams builder grade. A designer home feels collected over time, which means metals should mix. You should pick a dominant metal for about 70% of the finishes. Then, introduce a contrasting metal for the remaining 30%. Matte black pairs beautifully with aged brass, while polished nickel works well with bronze. The contrast prevents the room from looking like it was bought in a single catalog order. Think of hardware as the jewelry of the home, because it should coordinate without needing to match perfectly. A neutral room without texture isn't minimalist, since it is just unfinished. The most sophisticated spaces rely heavily on texture rather than loud patterns to create interest. This approach keeps monochromatic rooms engaging. You layer a boucle chair against a linen sofa, place a wool rug on wood floors, and throw a velvet pillow into the mix. Each material reflects light differently to create shadows and highlights that give the room weight. If your space feels flat despite having nice furniture, you are likely missing this tactile variety. Texture adds a physical dimension that pattern alone cannot achieve and makes the room feel warmer and more expensive. The fear of empty space drives people to fill every corner and cover every wall, which creates visual anxiety. Designer homes look better because they embrace the pause. Negative space refers to the empty areas between furniture or the blank wall around a piece of art that allows the design to breathe. It highlights the pieces you do have. If you cram a chair into a corner just because the corner is empty, you detract from the architecture. If you look at your room and your eye has nowhere to rest, you have over-decorated. Remove one chair, clear one surface, or take down one small picture so the remaining items instantly look more significant. Bringing nature indoors has evolved beyond a solitary fiddle-leaf fig in the corner. In 2026, biophilic design focuses on immersive ecosystems by using natural materials like raw wood, stone, and unlacquered organic textures to lower cortisol levels. A room completely devoid of organic matter feels dead. You need something that was once alive to ground the synthetic materials of modern furniture. This could be a large clay vessel, a stone coffee table, or even a statement tree. These elements soften the hard lines of architecture. They act as a subconscious signal of safety and comfort, which is why luxe hotels are filled with fresh flowers and wood accents. Every room needs a boss. This is the focal point, or the one thing that demands attention the moment you enter. In a living room, it might be a fireplace or a dramatic view, while in a bedroom, it is the headboard. A common failure in amateur design is forcing the eye to choose between a TV, a fireplace, and a gallery wall. This competition creates chaos. Identify the strongest architectural feature and arrange everything to worship it. If your room lacks a natural focal point, you must manufacture one, with a large-scale piece of art or a bold statement cabinet to anchor the room. Once the boss is established, everything else becomes the supporting cast. A house that looks exactly like a showroom feels impersonal and stiff. The final layer of design is the lived-in factor, which includes the items that suggest a human actually exists there. This means stacking real books you have read, not just decorative props. It means throwing a blanket casually over an armrest rather than folding it with military precision. It includes scent, which is the invisible design element that ties memory to space. A designer home balances perfection with specific imperfections. If everything is too precious to touch, it isn't a home, because it is a museum. Break the symmetry slightly by leaving a book open to let the house have a pulse. Coco Chanel famously said to look in the mirror and take one thing off before leaving the house. The same logic applies to interiors. Most people stop designing when they run out of money or space, but a designer stops when the balance is perfect. This usually means removing the last thing you bought. Take a photo of your room. The camera lens is ruthless. because it flattens the space and reveals clutter your eye has learned to ignore. Look at that photo to spot the distractions. The side table might be too crowded, or that extra chair blocks the flow. Editing is the only part of the process that costs $0, yet it adds the most value. These rules, from the 57-inch art height to the 60-30-10 color ratio, are not meant to restrict you, but serve as tools to give you confidence. Once you understand the math behind the aesthetic, you stop guessing and start building a home that actually serves you. It stops being about buying more stuff and starts being about placing the right stuff in the right way. If you want to keep refining your eye and learning the logic behind luxury, make sure you are subscribed for the next breakdown.